All right, so the last thing we're going to go over with programming in Python is loops. Loops is just a way of repeating a specific bit of code um, either for a fixed number of times or until some condition is met. So there's two types of loops that we're going to learn, and the first one is called a for loop, and it looks something like this. This is a pretty simple for loop. What you have here is you have the for keyword and then a variable name, something that you'll be able to use within the loop. And then you put the in keyword and then you use the range function and pass in whatever number you want for how many times you want this loop to run. So this for loop is going to run 10 times. Every time it runs, this variable x is going to start at 0 and it will increase by 1. So the piece of code that I have executing within this loop is just this print statement that prints out the value for x. So if I run this, you'll see it'll print out 10 times the number 0 to 9. So for loop is a way of executing a piece of code for a fixed number of times. Another type of loop is a while loop, and it's more for just executing code until a specific condition is met. So it's kind of similar to an if statement, except it will repeat whatever is within the block of code below it until the condition is met, whereas an if statement will run only once if the condition is met, right? So a while loop looks something like this. So I'll show an example where basically we're asking for input for the user to guess some sort of answer, and if they get it correct, the program will continue, but if not, they'll keep getting chances to guess. So we'll say the correct answer is 4, and then we'll also make a variable for the specified answer, which is what the user is selecting, and we'll just start that out at 0. And then we'll make the while loop. So it looks like this. We write while, and then we put a condition here. And so we'll say while specified answer is not equal to correct answer, we want this code to run as long as that condition is true. So we'll say specified answer equals the integer version of some input with the prompt guess a whole number. And then after all of this is over, so I'm making sure to go back to the beginning of the line, I'll type print correct. And so what happens here is basically this code will run as long as these two variables are not the same. So here, first time, specified answer is 0 and correct answer is 4. So those are not equal, so it will run this code. And this gives the user an opportunity to change the value of specified answer. So after they input something and it's converted to an integer, that will be stored within specified answer, and then the loop will check once again. Okay, is what they provided the same as the correct answer? If it is, then the loop will end and it will print correct. If it's not, the loop will go back and run this code again and let them guess another time. So let's go ahead and click run here. You can see at the end it says guess a whole number. So if I pick 1, that's not correct, and it asks us again. If I pick 2, that's not correct, and it asks us again. And then one more time I'll go 3. Okay, it's not correct, it asks us again. And now if I press 4 and hit enter, it's going to end the loop and it's going to say correct. Okay, so those are the two types of loops that we'll be using. So I'll show an example now. Well, just one example this time, and then I'll go and show an exercise, at which point I recommend you just pause the video, give a shot at the exercise for yourself, and afterwards just come back to the video and I'll show the answer. Okay, so here is first example. So we'll set an initial value for a sum. We'll read values and update the sum. So we'll make a variable here called number and get the float version of some input from the user. And we'll ask, please enter a number. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll set sum to be equal to whatever its current value is plus the number they provided. So we're constantly adding to sum. If I was to just put number here, it would wipe whatever was previously in sum and just set it to number, but we want to take what was previously in sum and also add on top whatever the user specifies. And then last thing is print the sum. Okay, the questions here are, what is the purpose of this program? What is the purpose of the variable x? Is line number 3 necessary for the program to run? Explain. And then we can say explain what is happening in line number 8. And then we can say what would happen if line number 8 was omitted from the program. Explain. Okay, so the first question is, what is the purpose of this program? Well, you can kind of already tell just from the variable names that we're allowing the user to input a bunch of numbers. We're calculating some sort of sum, right? We're just adding a bunch of numbers together and seeing what the sum is. But you can tell by some other details, for example, the number 10 here in the range function, we know that it's allowing the user to enter 10 numbers. And yeah, from this function here, the input, it's that the user is actually allowed to enter the numbers that are being summed. So in summary, it's just, it's a program that gives the user 10 opportunities to enter a number, and it will return the sum of all those numbers. So next question, what is the purpose of the variable x? So x is used here as part of the for loop, but it's not really used anywhere else in the program. So I would say it doesn't really have much of a purpose other than to allow us to use this for loop, which runs for a fixed duration 10 times, right? So that's pretty much the only purpose of x in this program. But it's still necessary. I couldn't remove it and just write for in range. You have to have something there. It could just be an underscore. It could be anything just to allow the for loop to run, basically. Okay, next question. Is line number 3 necessary for the program to run? Explain. So line number 3 is where we initially set this variable sum to be 0. So the next time we use sum is right here where we're setting sum again. So you might think, initially you might think, okay, why do we even have to set it here if we're setting it here? But it's a bit of a trick because when we're setting sum here, we're also using sum as part of the calculation for what sum should be at this point. So it's necessary that it has some sort of value at this point in time. So we have to set it beforehand. So yes, line number 3 is absolutely necessary for the program to run. I can show you the program running once like this. So we'll say 1, we'll just type the number 1 10 times. And you can see it works fine. But if I comment this line out, I run the program again, as soon as I enter a number, we'll get an error. Right? So yes, this line is necessary. So next question is explain what is happening in line number 8. Okay, so line number 8 is this line here. And I did already kind of explain this one while I was writing the code, but just to say it again, at this line, we're setting a value for the variable sum. And the value is this computed thing here. We're just adding what sum and number. So we're taking whatever sum currently is, we're adding on this number that the user has inputted, and we're setting the result to sum. So we're updating sum by just adding. What would happen if line number 8 was omitted from the program? Well, we can test it out by running it that way. So let's see. I'll just comment that line out, run it, and I'll do the number 1 10 times again. You can see it says the sum is 0. And you might have already caught on, but the reason this is because we set sum up here, and then within this loop, we're doing nothing with sum at all. So there's no way for sum to change. And at the end of the program, it just says the sum is sum. So we basically, this whole loop is just wasting time. We just set sum to 0 and then print it out because we're not making any changes to sum at all here. So if I include that back in and I run, we'll get, we'll get the expected behavior. Okay, let's go over the exercise. So here it is. The following blocks represent the steps of a program that averages 5 numbers entered by the user. Read number from user, end loop, set total to 0, start loop, repeat 5 times, set average to total divided by 5, print average, set total to total plus number. Okay, first order the blocks in the correct sequence. Next, create the program and use it to calculate the average of the 5 whole numbers user specified. So let me rewrite this question actually. So create the program and use it to calculate the average of 5 whole numbers that the user specifies. Okay, and finally, modify the program such that the user first specifies how many numbers will be averaged. Okay, so give it a shot, pause the video, try it for yourself, and when you're done, come back to the video. I'll go ahead and show the answer. Okay, so part A is it asks us to order the blocks in the correct sequence. So it might not be immediately obvious, but these blocks represent code and the code that could be run or tasks in a program, and they don't really make sense. They're out of order. So reading a number from a user being the first step, okay, that's fine. But then end loop, that's not really possible because no loop has started yet. So we can go ahead and take that out and put it below start loop because we know that we can't end a loop unless a loop has been started. Okay. The next one says set total to 0. Okay, that's something we totally could do now. So I'll leave that where it is. Then start loop, then end loop. Okay. And we see set average to total divided by 5. Okay, that's also possible because total is up here and it's been set to 0. So we could technically do this at this point in time. And then printing average, this also is possible here because here we're setting the average. So we have access to average already, right? And what I mean by this is, of course, like this line couldn't be higher up in the program here because when we say to print average, we have no idea what average is. It's never been set as anything before. But it can be here because right here, the line before, we're setting average to be total divided by 5. And then we print that out. And then this line, set total to total plus number, we could technically do this here as well because we have access to number and we also have access to total. But I mean, if you think about the purpose of this program as well, this doesn't really make much sense. So we're reading a number from the user, okay? But then we don't use that number until the very end. We've already printed an average. It looks just by reading these steps like this program is supposed to be calculating an average, right? And so, I mean, you might already know how to calculate an average where you're supposed to add a bunch of numbers together and divide it by the number of numbers that you're adding. And this isn't doing that. So where would this have to go? Set total to total plus number. Well, every time we want to increment the total, it's the same as that sum example. So I'll take this and I'll put it within the loop. Okay. So this is getting closer. Now the only thing is we're reading a number from the user once at the beginning, and then once we enter our loop 5 times, we're going to add that number to total. And that doesn't seem like the expected behavior because that would just be adding, basically multiplying the number by 5. So instead, we're going to move this line into the loop, and this should be the result. Now, I kind of walked through my thought process going through this problem, which might have been completely different than your thought process. But the idea is this is the order that the program should be in. How you came to that conclusion is fine as long as, you thought about it in a logical way and you didn't just guess or whatever, right? Think about it from like a problem-solving perspective or as if you were actually writing the code yourself. Anyways, moving on. Create the program and use it to calculate the average of 5 whole numbers that the user specifies. Okay, so we'll write that here. So we'll say total equals 0, just following the steps from up here. We start a loop that will repeat 5 times. Okay, and then we read number from the user. We'll grab input and we'll see, please enter a number. So that's that step. And then we set, we set total equals total plus number. That's this line, and then we end the loop by going to a new line and going back to the beginning of the line. And then we can set average equals total divided by 5 and print the average. So here's our program. So let's give it a shot. Clear the console real quick and I'll run it. So it says please enter a number. Okay. We'll do the average of 4, 2, 4, 2, and 3. It should be 3.0. Okay. So the program works fine. Next step, modify the program so that the user first specifies how many numbers will be averaged. Okay. For that, we need to ask a question at the very beginning to know how many numbers will be averaged. So really all we have to do here is we need this number here, this 5 here, and the 5 here. They need to be controlled by the user. So we're going to replace this with a variable that's going to be set by an input call. So right at the beginning, we can say count equals int input. How many values would you like to average? And then instead of using 5 here and 5 here, we can just use count and count. And this should be it. So now if I run the program again, we'll see how many values would you like to average, and we'll just say 4. And now I'll do again the same thing, 4, 2, 4, 2. And it doesn't ask us a fifth time because it's already done with all 4. And it gives us the average of 3.0.